everybody enter, and then we'll do some introductions to the rest of our panelists. We're on the Zoom meeting format today, so instead of the Q&A box, we'll run questions through the chat box. We've got Wale in the background from the ISE team making sure that everything runs smoothly, so you might find that he mutes you, etc. Because you're all in, if you do keep an eye on your mute button, because sometimes we'll get some background noise coming through. We're going to be as interactive as possible. So we've got three speakers who I'll introduce you to shortly. Today, we're talking all about emerging talent. This is the second in our series of webinars this year, the first one being the main report introduction. And this is one of, we're planning roughly 3 or 4, I think, through the year to go into a bit of a deeper dive on some of these subjects that are very important to the emerging talent agenda. I've got 3 great speakers today, and we're going to be focusing pretty much on skills today. That's what we want to go into, both in the context of within HE, within the employer world, and then I've also got Jim talking about how he supports very much employers in that whole skills journey. We are recording the session, so you will get a link to the session so you can follow up afterwards. And so please do share that, and we'll also produce a sort of blog style transcript from the just capturing the key points. So I think that's enough for me. General housekeeping. As I said, please keep it as interactive as possible. Pop any questions into the chat. I'll keep an eye on those. We're planning to run this till roughly 1:45. Those of you that have tuned into IC webinars before know that we're relatively relaxed around the approach, so we'll see how the conversation goes. So if you do need to drop off early, as I said, there'll be a recording so you can pick up on that. So why don't we do some introductions first? Jim, would you like to say first hello? First of all, you're first on my screen. Oh, Jim's on mute.
Unmute yourself. There we go. I think. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can do, Jim.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. So afternoon all. I'm Jim Carrick-Birtwell. I'm the founder and chief exec of a business called Future Talent Learning. We run leadership and management apprenticeships, and we run custom global programs. I'm deeply interested in kind of skills. I've done a number of things. Briefly, I was involved under the Cameron and Clegg government running an education to employment platform for 11 to 24-year-olds. It was the time when a lot of change was going on, and I've got a kind of first person in my family story.
Oh, Jim, you jumped. Yeah, oh, there you go. Sorry, jumped onto mute.
How we democratize access to the world of work, and I think that transition that people are making from education to employment is getting harder and harder. So having a real sense of what are we looking for, how can we communicate that to young people and indeed all people making transitions in the workplace is really important. So delighted to be involved today.
Smashing. Thanks very much, Jim. We'll be hearing from you more a bit later. Hayley, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Hayley Bowd. I am Director of Emerging Talent and Careers at Expedia Group, based in London, but the role really has a global view, so leading both recruiting and development. So our team hire people to come in on our various programs, and then we also run the programs from a development perspective. So we have our campus talent pathways, so the more traditional university routes, interns, graduates, and then we also have undiscovered talent pathways, so our apprenticeship program, military placement program, and others. So yeah, end to end. So we talk about skills a lot as well, and excited to be part of the conversation today.
Great, thanks, Hayley, and we'll be coming back to you shortly as well. First of all, speakers today is Ali. So the format is each of us are going to do sort of 20-minute sort of Q&A format discussion, and then we'll open to questions at the end. So Ali, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll get stuck into the meat of the session?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Ali Orr. I'm the Director of Student Development and Graduate Success at Kingston University, where I've been for almost 7 years now. Prior to that, I was working at the National Centre for Universities and Business, so I'm very much interested in sort of how universities and employers can work really sort of productively together and kind of close the gap in expectations and understanding around how we're preparing students for the world of work. I'm also the Future Skills Program Lead at Kingston, which has been a sort of curriculum transformation program which we began back in 2022. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that with you today.
You will, yeah. Thanks, Ali. I'm really pleased you could join us. I've been so impressed with the work that Kingston are doing. I think it's such a template for how we can really get the skills agenda into HE and how employers engage with it. So we'll get into more of the detail on that. So why don't you start, Ali, by just sort of explaining what is the core of Kingston's future skills approach?
Yeah, so I guess at the core of our approach is ensuring that every student on every course is able to develop the broader skills and attributes that will complement their subject knowledge and their technical skills. So sometimes we've sort of presented those things as in tension or in competition with each other within higher education. But I think it is kind of critical to the enduring value of higher education that we can produce graduates who have both sort of the domain knowledge, but also those broader skills and attributes that are going to enable them both to progress within their careers, but also to kind of rethink and sort of program their own careers as they move through a rapidly changing world of work. I suppose what that means in practice is that we have made a really conscious decision to explicitly scaffold skills development into every undergraduate course. We started with undergraduate, we'll be moving on looking at our postgraduate courses over the next year as well. And that requires us to make space within the course. So it's a real statement of intent from the institution. We make this credit bearing, we make it an assessed element of every year of the course, to ensure that we're giving the development of what we call future skills equal status to those other elements within the course. And I think for students coming into higher education, have gone through a sort of an education system which at each stage is kind of narrowing down their view. There's also a bit of reprogramming and relearning and unlearning that students need to do, and that we need to support them in to really sort of fully embrace that idea of these transferable skills and the value of them. So we've recognized the need to take that sort of scaffolded approach. It's also very much a collaborative venture. So I think some of those of you sort of in a higher education background who've been working alongside academics, trying to sort of take forward the embedding agenda will know that sometimes where it gets bogged down is kind of recognizing whose responsibility is it and getting into some of those debates around whose job it is. At Kingston, it's very much a collaborative piece. Over the past 3 years, I've co-led the Future Skills Programme with our Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education, and that sort of that collaboration filters all the way through down to sort of course and module level, where we've got staff in the sort of professional services teams, many of whom are sort of working really closely with employers and have a very external focus, working alongside academics to bring this together in to sort of a whole.
Got it. But can I just ask where this, because it having been onto campus and sort of read the reports and been involved with the work you're doing, it really does feel a whole campus piece of work. I know we'll get into a bit about the academic and employer engagement, but it strikes me that your senior leadership is fully bought into that. Is that a fair perception?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have, it's at the heart of our strategies. So we launched a new university strategy in 2022, and Future Skills was sort of the sort of core piece. It's the glue, it's our curriculum transformation program, but it's also sort of how we link up teaching with knowledge exchange and research. And yeah, as you say, it has very much that top-down support as well as bottom-up. And what we're finding increasingly, because it's very much synonymous with who we are as an institution now, is that staff are attracted to Kingston because they want to sort of support the Future Skills programme, and because they're really passionate about being able to make a difference for our students by supporting their skills development. So we're able to attract new staff on that basis, that we've got a really clear sort of mission and vision around education at Kingston. It was prompted, or it sort of all started with a report that we did with YouGov back in 2021, which was all about the sort of skills that future skills needs that employers will have. and we polled over 2,000 businesses to identify their future skills needs in that report. And the findings from that report kind of very much echoed a lot of the literature that's out there, what you might find in the sort of reports by McKinsey, World Economic Forum, and so on. But I think what was sort of particularly striking is that the level of consistency of the sort of skills, the top 5, top 10 skills that came out across sectors. So there weren't like tons of differences between different sectors, and we were able to then convert those sort of top 10 skills into a set of 9 graduate attributes, which is what we're really very much embedding into every course. So it's got that visibility across the institution, and we've got that sort of commonality in the language that we're using around the skills, which I think again allows it to be a whole campus, whole university initiative, because we're starting to build up that common language, where in the past we would just talk at cross purposes a lot of the time, so that's been a key part of it, and we've repeated or we've sort of evolved that report with YouGov, and we've sort of published a further 2 reports, and we've got some ongoing research at the moment. So we're keeping that eye on how things are evolving. Won't be surprised to see that we saw a sort of spike in digital literacy, digital competency around the time that ChatGPT launched. But actually what we've seen is there's a lot of consistency in the sort of the key skills, the key attributes that come up again and again and again.
Yeah, I've read that YouGov stuff, and it's it's very, very thorough work. So is that the core of where actually you got the analytical data to decide which skills that you wanted to focus in? Were there other sources? Is it something you're constantly evolving?
It is
Yeah,
the
sure.
core. I think some noise in the background. I think it's the core of our sort of approach, and that gives us the 9 graduate attributes that every student will sort of work towards developing. I think at local levels, we obviously look at when you're attributes quite a broad concept, right? So I'll give you some examples. We're talking about resilience, we're talking about adaptability, we're talking about creative problem solving, and beyond. And so to actually break those down into what are some of the skills that actually comprise those attributes, and what might that look like in different contexts. So we're able to kind of, under that umbrella of the 9 graduate attributes, really contextualize that for students on their course, to think about what some of the skills that will support the development of those wider attributes would look like as well.
Got it. Okay. And is that something you think, how static do you find that? Is it something that you think is, I mean, it's difficult to predict the future, that will change significantly over time, or are you more of the mindset that these kind of core foundations are, they're pretty consistent over the years?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think one of the sort of obviously big shifts we're seeing is the rise in generative AI, and what we're seeing so far. And I think there's like tons of things written and published and discussed around it. But what the sort of consensus appears to be is actually sort of doubling down on those human-centric skills. What are the skills? We were at an event together a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking to EY about some of the research that they'd done, and how AI is more likely to enhance. I think for every skill it replaces, it enhances 2 others. And those skills that it enhances are very much the human-centric skills, which we're very much focusing on developing in our students. So I think, if anything, the kind of case for developing those skills and attributes is only going to get stronger over time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that's part of the reason we're putting so much effort into this work, which is that it streams to me that could be the one of the few consistencies as things evolve. In your introduction, you mentioned that word scaffolding, and I think that's a really important word when it comes to skills. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was those kind of structures you put in place for students around skills development, because yes, it's more complex than saying, here's a list of skills, go and develop them, you'll be fine. So do you want to talk a little bit more, expand on that a bit around what you do in that space?
Yeah, please. So I think that is really very much key for us, and particularly from a sort of program perspective, where you've got something like 120 undergraduate courses across 4 faculties, across 10 schools. we can't do something that's completely micromanaged. We need to, the courses have sort of academic autonomy and so on. But what we've tried to do is ensure that in every course there is space to scaffold that explicit proactive skills development. And that begins in year one, and it begins with a sort of contextualized introduction to the graduate attributes with examples of what they mean in the discipline, in the subject. And students have space to do a self-assessment against different graduate attributes, something that they can go back to and repeat as many times as they wish, and they can look at how their sort of development kind of tracks over time. In year two, we sort of stepped that up quite significantly, and we use different forms of work integrated learning, so live projects, hackathons, placements, and so on, very intentionally to give space to students to develop those graduate attributes, again, sort of explicitly rather than implicitly. So any sort of give an example of a live project that we embedded across I think 4 or 5 courses this year, where sort of we will flag the sorts of opportunities to develop the different graduate attributes by working together with different students on a live brief set by an employer. And then again, students are then assessed in the development of those attributes. What we do alongside that sort of work integrated learning is then every student has the opportunity to go through an assessment centre, and that assessment centre gives them a personalised feedback report against the 9 graduate attributes. And with the assessment centres, those again are somewhat contextualised to the different discipline, but they will involve 3 or 4 different forms of assessment. So we begin to get a more rounded assessment of student skills, and they can take that feedback back against their own self-assessment that they've done over the sort of first half of their course. And I think what we've found more and more as we've done this is that becomes quite a key moment in their development, where they're able to get that external feedback, compare it to how they thought they were doing, and really start to think about how the skills they've been developing within the context of their own course, within the context of their own subject, then translate out into the real world, into what employers are looking for. And I think for us, implicit in higher education has always been development of skills, but we're surfacing it and we're helping students to think about, how do I articulate that? How do I translate that into sort of new contexts? And how do I, how might I then sort of develop myself in the workplace? So it really builds on their self-awareness by being able to compare how they thought they were doing with some externalized feedback. And then we go into the final year. Most of our degrees are 3-year degrees with some exceptions, but students will then progress into the final year. And there we've created space for students to start to take a little bit more ownership of their own development. So rather than things being like really tightly scaffolded, you will do this, you will do that, students then have access to a wide range of different skills developing opportunities. They have their own sort of graduate attribute profiles, that they know what they want to work on developing. They might want to build on some of the areas that they're weak on, or they might actually want to double down on some of their strengths as well. And we've worked with Capfinity this year with their skills discovery tool to really help students to sort of understand their strengths and how that also fits into the development of the different attributes. So that's some of the scaffolding, and some of it, I think, is fair to say is still a work in progress, but it's how we've been able, I think, to embed this into every single degree programme in the space of a couple of years, and ensure that for all students there is the space to develop those skills, there is the space to stop and reflect on it, and there is the space to then take that further in the direction that they want to take it in. And I think a lot of the stuff from Bobby Duffy, who I know you're a fan of, Stephen, and also a recent report out of Bristol, which I think Nicola Dandridge led on, sort of talks about sort of regret and talks about students who feel that they studied the wrong subject. Some of that, especially given the labour market that we have and the graduate labour market that we have in the UK, is not so much that students have studied the wrong degree, it's that we haven't necessarily given them the tools to be able to identify the skills they developed on their degree and how that's still applicable to such a wide range of potential careers. So we're also trying to address that through that sort of giving students some agency, developing that sort of culture of lifelong learning, because I know a lot of graduates kind of get out of formal learning and they're like, oh, glad I'm done with learning, right? And we want to kind of actually build up the pace. We know if there's one certainty is that you are going to have to reskill and you're going to have to kind of upskill in the workplace. So gives them that sort of exit trajectory from the degree as well, that they're committed to their own development as they sort of progress into the workforce.
Right. And essentially, those themes really do come through in those in the development surveys that we run in terms of those are the ones who will be successful. You've obviously put a bit of thought to this. I was just going to ask you just to expand on it a bit more, because one of the challenges reported around skills, of course, is quite often it's left to self-assessment. And of course, if you're self-assessing in the field, you haven't got lots of experience on. You might think, oh, I've done a group exercise, therefore teamwork, tick. Do you think that balance is between actually at scale, you've just got some of it has got to be self-assessment, but then also actually it sounds to me like you have put some thought into actually, yes, let's give some benchmarks or some ways for people to get feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it has to be a combination. I think we need to look at the sort of multiple sources. Students are used to receiving feedback on their course, but then we kind of get into that, who's the best person to give you feedback? In terms of your academic development, that will be your course team. But in terms of like sort of assessing your sort of how you might be displaying some of those skills, in a work-related context, that's quite a different thing. So we put a lot of thought into, as you say, sort of how we can give more of a 360 view, but then sort of where there's scope, I think, to sort of work with other external providers. I mentioned Capfinity. I know there are lots of others active in this space to start to think about sort of how students understand their own strengths more. And then it's sort of how that all fits together, I think, which is key without overwhelming students.
Definitely. And you've also given me a nice sort of feed into this. One's like we've planned this before, isn't it, Ali? That feed into it's almost that last question I've got for you around actually that engaging with academic employers, because through everything you've been saying, you've been talking about that academic involvement. So it seems like, I'm sure it's not perfect everywhere, but it does seem to me you've done a good job of integrating the academics into this piece so they feel this own it. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you've engaged with academics and what that process is?
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying and sort of being really honest that although we launched our strategy in 2022 and we launched the Future Skills Programme in 2022, I think I've certainly been trying to sort of chip away at this for as long as I've been at Kingston, so for a good 7 years now, and sort of talking about that, the sort of the importance of that collaboration, that this is something that we have to do collectively. Like it's not just a responsibility on academics or just a responsibility on careers teams. So we have to work together. I think we've closed the gap in understanding hugely over that time. I think with the sort of top-down support, it's also easier to sort of see the incentives in getting involved in some of this work for academics, which isn't always there in different institutions. And I think, both for academics, but also for students, one of the things that we've had to challenge is the sort of culture of risk aversion and the fear of failure. And it's funny because I think it applies to both groups. And I think it's really important for students who come in from a school setting. We do a lot of work around, I sort of mentioned reprogramming, but actually being much more comfortable with failure as a form of learning. And I think recognizing as well that for a lot of academics, when they're doing it for the first time, that, it's not going to go perfectly, and that there is space to kind of grow, and we provide a lot of development support, but it has been a cultural piece as well in terms of just being more willing to try different things, and because it's been an institution-wide program with some scaffolding but with some space for innovating along the way, we've effectively built a lab where we've just been able to learn a huge amount. And then finally, it's also not just about us within the institution, but it's also working really seamlessly with the outside world as well. So employers played a huge part, particularly in our sort of second and third years of the programme, in sort of coming in and setting projects, in sort of contributing to the assessment piece through our assessment centres, and in all of the sort of research that we've done in terms of what their needs are. I think the more we can align what we're doing with some of the themes coming out around graduate development as well, the better. So employers are a big part of what we do. We couldn't do it without them. And I think students gain a huge amount. They love working with employers who sort of come into the curriculum. And I'll sort of close, I guess, on the point that I started with, which is, again, it's sort of part of our commitment to inclusivity and equity as well, that we know not every student's going to be able to do placements, internships, those sort of really, particularly some of the longer in duration opportunities, but by bringing employers directly into the curriculum, we build student skills, we build their confidence. And I think we start to build a talent pool, certainly at Kingston, that employers are really keen to engage with us around.
Great, thanks, Ali. There's a couple of questions in the chat, and we'll come back to those at the end if we've got time. But I thought I would just ask one actually from Simon, because this might add a bit of context. It might be unfair getting you to recite all 9. But Simon was asking what those 9 attributes are. Could you just quickly give us a headline to the main? Because I think that might just help us a bit of context and a context for the rest of the debate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sort of toyed with having a slide with them on, which I probably should have done, because now you're putting me on the spot. I will share a link in the chat. But we're talking about creative problem solving, resilience, adaptability, collaboration, empathy, digital competency, and a couple of others as well. So I'll cop out there and
that'll impress you. That'd be useful to that kind of memory. Great, thanks, Ali. And we'll come back to some of the other questions at the end. Appreciate it. Thanks. Please. Great way to start the conversation. As I said, I was really pleased to get you on this webinar because having seen it firsthand, the work you do there, it's very, very impressive. Jim, so can I bring you into the conversation? Sort of picking up on from what Ali's been saying, very much in that HE context. Of course, you've been very much involved in skills for the majority of your career. Right from the school stuff that I'd forgotten about until you mentioned it actually just now. So this piece on the skills piece, it has always been there as a subject, but it definitely seems to me that over recent years, partly because of skills-based organisation, partly in the HE space. There seems to have been a shift in that role importance of skills development. What's your views on that? What kind of shifts have you seen?
Thanks, Stephen. You're right. I think fundamentally, the education system at every level hasn't been set up for what are the actual transferable skills. So what employers are asking for now, or the 9 attributes that we've just heard from Ali, actually they're not new. They've been around for a really, really long time. And actually employers have said, we're hiring against jobs and we get amazing CVs. They all look brilliant. The theme is the CVs look better and better. But actually, when we bring people in, they don't have these kind of core skills. I think some of the things that have happened that Ali's talked about, technology enablement, the pace of change has accelerated the need for people to have transferable skills. I think, again, as Ali has said, there has been a real convergence in agreement on what are the skills that actually employers are looking for, that are regarded as sustainable for the future, no matter what comes down the line. And in very simple terms, there are 2 skills that we describe. There's digital skills, which is no longer the ability to code. It's digital fluency and be comfortable in lots of different digital environments. And human skills. In very simple terms, nobody's disagreeing about that. I think other things that are impacting in terms of what those human skills look like, hybrid and remote work has played quite a significant part in a rethink about how people can be productive and how people can actually navigate the new world of work, which includes virtual and hybrid. And those are things like, again, stronger digital communication skills, The best employers are training people to not just have a meeting on Team and Zoom, but how can you optimize for that? Even the height of your camera, your body language, the length of time you spend on calls, etc. So I think another element that hybrid and remote has impacted is self-management has become key. Many other things, but essentially, I think those human skills. And another big theme that's coming out is the the real centrality of upskilling and reskilling, and a mindset, not just from employers, but I think Ali touched on that. If young people, whether they're graduates or however they're coming into the workplace, they have to have that growth mindset, which is I'm continually learning, I'm continually building on things, I'm continually questioning and challenging what I know, and I'm very receptive to feedback. I'm kind of the more humility people have, and that's at all levels in the workplace, actually that's a sign of real strength. So I think finally employee expectations has changed. It's not it, I'll be grateful for any development. Actually, that's the main thing I want. And to begin with, they'll say whatever they need to say to get a job because it's blooming hard to get a job. But once they've got a job and they're in the workplace, retaining the best talent comes down to a very simple contract now, which is I'm not an indentured slave. I'm not committing forever and a day. But while I'm here, I'll work blowing hard. But in return, I want to be more employable in 2 or 3 years' time than I am now. Best book on this, by the way, I've ever come across, and I read a lot, is The 100-Year Life by Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan, two professors at London Business School. And they were looking at all the trends. Their petri dish are 20-somethings coming through the doors of London Business School. And they basically looked at what are all of these transformational or transferable skills that young people are going to need. And actually, instinctively, a lot of them get it.
Got it. I'm trying not to turn around. If I could reach onto my bookshelf behind me, which is in the behind me, is exactly that book. I'm about a third of the way through
well-thumbed
it.
copy,
Yeah,
I'm
I
sure.
agree. Yeah, I agree. I think it's very important because we're all going to be working. I was a slight digression. I mentioned this before. I was on a CBI call where somebody from the Migration Advisory Committee was there and he said, we expect employers to have structures to keep people in work till they're 67. That's the retirement age. Anyway, I think we'll divert if we go down that a little bit.
Absolutely.
Jim, on the kind of a lot of the talk around a skills-based organization. I mean, you work with a lot of people leaders, HRD leaders. Do you think there has been that shift into a greater realization that there are these core foundational skills that need to be built up across the organization? I'm trying really hard not to use the word generic, but I can't on the fly think of a different word. But have you seen that change over recent years? I guess that increasing focus that people need these skills to be able to move around, to change, and to focus on that, rather than actually you're going to do X job, so therefore you need that skill, whether it's coding, finance, whatever that might be.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I think what we've noticed is that in academic land, in learning land, there is a very clear understanding of what these human skills look like. The difference now is that business leaders, and by that I mean chief execs, and we talk to a lot of chief execs, and there's a lot of research out. PwC's annual survey of CEOs is very, very relevant, and they talk about the skills that they need. And the thing about C-suite folk is they don't talk in HR or learning language. They shoot from the hip. And they will say, we need people that are, have more business acumen, or we're too slow at making decisions, or we don't change fast enough. So they use business language, and actually the convergence of, if you like, the learning world and the business world, we found it very helpful to use. We use it quite a lot. It's an acronym ACE, which is Agile, Collaborative, Entrepreneurial. And below that, all of the human skills, all of the kind of 9 attributes that Alice talked about, they kind of fit. So agile is that adaptability, that ability to be comfortable with change, but also a deep self-awareness of how you respond to change. We talk about, I think one of the things employers don't realize is that we talk about change as if it's some wonderful thing. And actually, then when young people come in, or actually indeed current, employees turn around and say, "Oh, I'm really not comfortable. I hate this." And actually, that's normal. Change is horrible. I don't like the fact I'm kind of getting older and losing my hair. It still works from front on, but it's not great from the back. Let's be really honest. So we're meant to think about change as wonderful. So actually helping people recognize and develop an emotional intelligence around what is your response? Because if you can't understand that, you're not going to be able to work in teams or work with others going through change effectively. Collaborative is really talking about all of your interactions with other people. So relationships, stakeholder management, communication. Nobody's disagreeing about the centrality of that in digital communication and regular in-person communication. And then there's entrepreneurial, is all of these kind of business critical skills, business acumen, decision making, problem solving, creative thinking, etc. And growth mindsets in there. I've mentioned that kind of runs through everything really. So it feels to me that I think your question is there a convergence? Has anything changed? I think it's the fact that everyone's realizing this is where the value is now. This is where competitive value lives. And the final thing I'll say on it, we work with a lot of chief people officers, heads of learning, heads of talent, heads of early years, future talent. And actually, one of the most valuable things we do for them as a kind of non-paid service is we help them build business cases. Because actually aligning the skills development, instead of being in a vacuum, but aligning it to things that are going to resonate with C-suite and senior stakeholders, not only unlocks budget, it also creates sustainability for the programs that they're developing. So that's been an eye-opener for us, how valuable that's been.
All right. Jim, I wonder if it's worth just bringing to life a little bit around actually what it looks like in the programs that you develop with your clients, the structures you put in place that you think are important to develop learning, because you do this at scale, don't you? It's not just sort of small programs with a group of people. So why don't you sort of bring it to life a little bit so people can get an idea of what it looks like, and then we can sort of dig into that a bit more.
Yeah, well, if I talk about the kind of level 3 leadership and management apprenticeship, the reason we developed that, and we do a level 5 as well, and we run global programs, but essentially we work with hundreds, if not thousands, of employers over the last 20 years, and when we were talking to them about this subject, what are the core skills? What do you need? They said, we have a lot of accidental managers in our business. We have people at all levels, all functions, all industries, and through no fault of their own, at some stage we promote them and say, there you go, manage other people. And it's a complete lottery. We haven't developed them, we haven't trained them. So that became our brief. And what we did is we mapped it to established leadership and management standards, apprenticeship standards. We're also passionate about social mobility and democratizing world-class learning. So we also looked at MBA programs. And essentially our brief is a mashup. We've reimagined leadership and management apprenticeships as mini MBAs. But we also looked at all the pedagogy that's right at the cutting edge of what's working on the skills side. So our programs, we've got 3 deliverables. We've designed all of our own multimedia content. It's now sat on an AI-enabled platform. So as well as learners going through and cohorts of graduates in a very kind of systematic way, they can also, in a kind of chat GPT-like way, ask a question, and it will pull, a podcast, but goes straight to minute 7. So you need to chair a meeting. Here's how to prepare an agenda. So they don't have, instead of having to read a library shelf, we take them straight to the relevant page. And that allows them to really apply the learning in the flow of their work. The second element is events. So our background, we a lot of people, if they know of the Future Talent brand, it's through Future Talent conferences that we've run for many years. We run, everything's delivered virtually, but we run 90-minute experiential learning sessions. And we call them simulations. And the role of those is, because most of what we're teaching young people, or indeed any managers at all levels, are these behaviors, if you can't visualize them, it's very, very hard to move towards it. So the role of events is to bring to life or to simulate the behavior. So if I describe one, if it's on psychological safety, there might be 30 learners, and we've got thousands of learners on program. In 90 minutes, there'll be a very senior facilitator. For 5 minutes, that he or she will say, okay, here's a model, here's a theory of psychological safety. This is what it's all about. Now, next 10 minutes, going to break you out into small groups and practice chairing a meeting in a more inclusive way. Here's some tips. Come back together. How did that feel? And then go again. And across 90 minutes, the idea is that they'll not just learn about the model, but they'll practice in a really safe space. And actually, that works incredibly well. We also employ gamifications, which again, typically business schools use. And that we can work with those globally outside the levy, but it allows people in a safe way and a fun way. People learn better when they're having fun to practice. And the third element's coaching. So we've got outstanding coaches. So every learner, every graduate would have their own personal development coach, which, I'm a chief exec. I don't have a personal development coach. It's an amazing thing to have someone guiding you through a curriculum, helping you apply it, getting to know your line manager. We've also got 24/7 AI coaching and role plays. Again, so that learners can practice, and young people, that's not weird for them. That's okay. That's kind of, as my 15-year-old son would say, that's cold. That's just what they would expect. So those are some of the elements of what we call our transformational leadership program.
Got it. Right, that's a phrase I've not heard before. Well, not in that context anyway. Yeah. So it's listening to what you're saying. That's right. Because if I go back to when I used to have a bit more hair as well, I started out my first management trainee job. The courses we went on, we had to go on. They were residential. You went away, and whether you paid attention or not might be up for debate, but you were there. Whereas it strikes me that, is there a fundamental skill that I say everybody needs, but also maybe particularly those starting out in their careers, which is it the drive, the motivation? What in this are the points that actually I'm trying to think that I'm trying not to use the word make people engage, but when it's online and much more at the user driven content, that's a bit different than being forced to do something, because you're sent away into almost that classroom style. So is there a core skill within it which is that self-directed learning, that motivation to learn? What are your thoughts on building that into the structure of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, my impression of most people actually in the workplace, and particularly young people coming into the workplace, they're incredibly motivated. It's very hard to get a job. That transition from education to employment has always been a difficult rite of passage. And that's if you come from a well-supported background with lots of social capital. For most young people now, with or without social capital, that is an extremely difficult transition to navigate. So if they're in front of you in employment, they've got a lot of motivation, de facto, to have got there one way or another. I think it's the job often of employers to articulate, this is what good looks like, and these are the skills that are going to help you progress and add value and be productive. And if employers are not able to do that, then actually I think that's where there's a kind of often a mismatch of productivity and will, but it's not channeled in the right way. So that's my sense in terms of and what I think what employers need to be doing is aligning the skills throughout their organization. And actually, my recommendation for early years is don't do things in a siloed way, but get buy-in from senior people. And controversial thing to say, but a lot of heads of learning are more occupied by this is my day job. All our technology platforms are great. All our suppliers are great. But actually, they're not having the strategic conversations aligned to what the business needs and what the chief execs need. And the most progressive chief learning officers or CPOs, actually, that's their focus. How can we future-proof not just our people, but our organization? And then when they communicate that in a very aligned way, I think that's the most motivating thing for any employee, but it creates clarity. And it also shows that they have, they've read the tea leaves, all the data's out there, there's a convergence, there's an agreement of what's needed, even in disrupted, uncertain times. And organizations that have a clarity about that, I think, will not just attract the best people, but will retain them and become the most productive businesses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Definitely, Jim. It aligns to a lot of the stuff that we've been hearing to and doing a bit of research on as well. Jim, I could ask you two or three more, but I am conscious of time. So I think we'll come back to some of these subjects. So I think that's a nice segue into Hayley's piece, actually, and understanding actually what it is like in that employer context. So as I said at the start, we should have some time for questions at the end. So keep popping into the chat, or if you've got any other comments to make. Hayley, so from your perspective at Expedia, what's your sort of take on this, on the role that skills play in your hiring and development strategies?
Yeah, and it's been great to hear from Ali and Jim. There's been so many ideas and concepts that I definitely relate to from an employer perspective as well. I think for us, I will call out, I think, emerging talent is just one part of Expedia's overall talent and development world. So we're really focusing on those, maybe earlier in their careers or, doing something different, career changes. So skills have definitely played a big role. For us, it's been really important that we have something to work from and almost anchor to. On the hiring side, it's super key because it's just so competitive. Application volumes are so high. We know that candidates are using AI now to mass apply, and we really want to be hiring based on skills and potential. Huge link there to inclusivity, removing bias from how we hire. We've identified some key skills for our emerging talent program. So what's important to join us as an intern or a graduate or an apprentice? What are some of the skills that we really deem to be key and we want to look for, and then we want to support development of as well through the programs? And there's a huge piece of work that actually went into that. What does good look like of current program participants? What do we know about how things are evolving internally and externally? We did a lot of analysis on the role profiles that we recruited for. We did interviews with senior stakeholders. We did focus groups with people who are on program, going through the learning elements of the program. Even looked at, as an organization, what are our values as a company and how do we make sure that we're linking to that in terms of who we're hiring. So we have 8 key skills that we look at. So on the hiring side, we've got what we call a top of funnel assessment. It's automated. It really helps candidates understand a little bit about us and what we're looking for. And it's really transparent. And then it also helps us see how candidates are aligning to those skills. And then on the development side, we embed those skills as focuses of the program. So, whether that's interns might be here for 10 weeks. So what does that look like over the 10-week program? For our graduates, we bring them together quarterly. So, it's really easy to, when you join an organization, some learning is definitely front loaded. We have onboarding. But we really work hard to think about how do we almost like bring those skills in at the right time and think about developing them at the right time and reminding through the program, not just at the start of the program. If I think about sort of overall strategy for emerging talent, for us, it's really, we say that we balance the base of the organization. So we're thinking about key skills in key locations. So it's really rooted in organizational health. and then delivering those enterprise-wide programs to then deliver against that. I think one more thing that I'm really excited about, and it's a bigger piece of work, something that our talent management team are working on, but they're looking at, we're calling it career frameworks. So, we've got a pretty comprehensive set of job families and role profiles and the skills aligned to them, but this piece of work will really hone in on some of those key skills, and particularly around different levels. So where are skills really important, and how are they differentiated, to really help our employees think about their career pathways and how they might move around different profiles or different levels. So it's definitely exciting.
So would that be driven by some of those technology solutions in terms of surfacing those skills, identifying them, understanding where they're mapped across the organization? That's something that I want the ISE to get into a bit next year. Sorry, no, later on this year. It seems to me there's a whole space of stuff out there that's promising quite a bit that might be achievable with those kind of ideas.
Yeah, there's a lot of almost existing frameworks and existing methodologies, and then also there's options to build and to build that structure. So it's something our talent management team are looking at the moment. So I'm really keen to think about, the 8 skills that we look at. How do we really align to that and embed with that framework? What does it mean for those coming in on our programs? How can they really leverage that and think about the different career pathways that they might have? Because so many of the skills are transferable as well. So I think this is really going to help people think differently about what their career might look like.
Got it. And do you have a view on actually what those core skills? Obviously, you mentioned the 8. We're going to get into trading lists soon, aren't we? But rather than recite a list, do you have a view on actually what those core skills is? We've talked about it both with Ali and Jim. For those coming into that sort of early career space within an organisation.
Yeah, and so much of I think what's been discussed definitely resonates, and I'm happy to pick out a few. This is definitely something I've been looking into quite a bit recently, thinking about longevity of our programs, and if we're trying to think really strategically about pipelining talent and the key skills, we need to be getting this right, or we need to feel good enough that we're getting it right. So I totally agree that you've got those more core human skills, and then the more I probably would say more functional, more technical, that are more aligned to the role profile. The concept has been brought up a lot today around learning agility, but I think that's really something that's so important. Just that almost innate ability and curiosity to continually learn, absorb information in different ways. Not just be tied to maybe one way around learning. Self-awareness around how you learn. Seeing continuous learning as an opportunity. And I think both Jim and Ali have talked about unlearning, which I think is a really interesting concept as well. And that openness to think, actually, maybe I have done something one way, but I'm going to think about it differently, and I'm going to adapt and adjust. I think linked to that, Jim talked quite a bit about change, but something we're seeing is just around resilience, and the link to agility. So, the workplace, we're in rapidly changing environments. It's very hard to predict. And actually, a peer of mine used a term recently, introduced me to something I hadn't heard, the term of stagility. So this mix of stability and agility. As humans, we crave stability, and we really look for things to be in our comfort zone and not changing. But really, the real world is just not like that, and we have to be adapting and pivoting all the time. And so that being able to build resilience and do that has been really, really key. And we definitely see that people, you enter the workforce for the first time, and the different things and challenges you have to get through. We see that being developed pretty early on, actually, with people that are joining. Another one I would say. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. Carry on. Sorry, I'll interrupt you. I'll come
Yeah,
back to it in a minute.
Another one I was going to call out was more of like systems thinking, so more of a cognitive skill, but I think something we're seeing as being really important is just being able to take a bigger picture, more holistic view, connect the dots, just think bigger, and asking the right questions to think about all angles of a problem. As an organization, we're certainly, after the pandemic, we're working way more globally than ever before. And I think Jim was talking about productivity, and I was thinking, actually, we're trying to teach even interns and graduates how to be productive globally. Like, follow in the sun. If your colleagues in a different part of the world, how do you team up to get things done and be really, really efficient? So just being able to think much more broadly and have that connectivity. And we're just looking at the moment, how do you, when you're part of such a large, complex organization, how do you help people understand that in a really easy way, in an interactive way? How do you see how the different parts of an organization come together to get work done? And it's really, you can show a business model and you can talk through, but that, experiential element of really bringing that to life is really important. And the final one, I think, goes without saying around AI and big data. But I think interestingly, this is something, it's a skill that's relevant across all roles and definitely not just technical roles. It's connected with learning agility as well. Like even the openness of using AI, I think there's so much fear around it. But we're seeing participants come into our programs who are very, very literate. They've got a lot of confidence. They've already been using it a lot through, just general life and their studies. And so not being afraid, again, seeing the opportunity. I just saw on LinkedIn last week, I think Google is in the US, but they've given US students access to their premium AI tool until they finish their studies. So a really perfect example of, students are going to use it anyway. So actually, how do we enable them? And how do we think about, giving them the right tools and embracing that? Interesting from an employer standpoint, where we know they're also using AI through interview processes, and how do we become more comfortable? How do we use AI to make our processes more efficient as well? Some of these skills, I was looking at the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs survey, and a lot of them are coming up on there as being key for, as we look to 2030. And there was a recent example even within our team of how we're using the skills. So someone on our team has just been using Gen AI to look at cross-referencing the skills we're developing on program, running our role profiles through AI, and almost like sense checking using AI that where we're focused feels right based on what we're asking when we hire. So just an example of even how our team are thinking about that.
Got it. And interesting. I'd asked a similar question to Jim actually. Listening to you explain how your approach. I was taken back to many years ago when I used to run a development program for a big retailer, and it was interesting. We were then trying to build in self-directed learning into the program, and I'm not sure we did it that well. But one of my takeaways was those that did it anyway, and those that really weren't that interested or weren't tuned, it kind of they wanted to be spoon-fed. It was very hard to shift their mindset. Is that something you think about? Do you recruit for learning agility, or do you think it's also something that people can be, taught, or it's a skill, it's an attitude that can be built?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because, culturally as an organization, there's many different ways that we can offer learning. But I think that there's definitely a core fundamental around, employees knowing where to go and knowing where to look and almost that openness. So I think that's something we build into our onboarding and our inductions. And actually, even before candidates have joined, when we talk about how learning is delivered, absolutely there'll be some sessions where an invite will appear in your calendar, but there's so many other ways that you can learn and tools that will be provided to you. So I think as an organization, we try and make sure that learning is a focus. I think it's hard sometimes that, when you've got a busy day job and, things are busy anyway. So some of our divisions here will have like a quarterly day of learning where the expectation is there'll be a focus on a different skill each time. And, even in some of our revenue generating teams, it will be the focus actually for today is around your growth and how you're focusing on your own learning and like developing skills that are then going to support you to be better and more efficient in your role, but also help you progress in your career. So yeah, I think we're definitely seeing people come in who are very ambitious, firstly, curious, but very open to different ways of learning, and they're seeking that. And it's just how do we give the right tools at the right time to make sure that they're enabled to do that.
It sounds like you're building a sort of a culture around it as well, which is that organization wide piece. Cool.
Definitely,
The
yeah.
um um having listened to sort of Ali's approach at Kingston, listening to the work that Jim's doing, do you have any thoughts actually on either based on the work that you are doing or different ways you think that actually is a broad sector? Because it strikes me that actually we're dealing transitions through education into work, which we always have been, but with that changing pace of the world of work, whether it's AI or other things that are changing the way that it works. Do you think there are ways that actually that employers and universities can work better together, where we can kind of knit these agendas together a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. And it was great to hear about the work at Kingston. I think, involvement of employers and the collaboration that's already happening in so many spaces. I think even the opportunity, connection, talking frequently about even skills as a topic, trends we're seeing is a great place to start. I think, one of my big takeaways from today is just the level of, there's definitely, connection between what we're all seeing and some of the skills we're calling out. So then how do we just harness that to make sure that we're supporting, whether that's from employer side, education side, etc., in the right way. I think, definitely more collaboration on programming. As an example, we're trying to do more year-round engagement. So I think really interesting. I think it's very typical in the employer space to have, your hiring season opens and you show up on campus. And I think something, we've definitely been guilty of in the past. How do we do more year round? How are we actually working with universities to engage students through the academic curriculum and not just at the point of potentially having roles? So that's one of the things we've been looking at. Can we, for example, take some of our leaders onto campus and help deliver content and sessions? And this has been really interesting because we've just actually been starting to do this in India with one of our partner schools and take some of our technology leaders out to campus outside of hiring season, almost just more of a thought leadership and a connection piece. But it's been really interesting to see. It's really important that this is two-way. So really important to understand how employers are thinking about skills, but it's been equally important for us to understand educational perspective, motivations and behaviors of young people. And, in this example, when we were setting up maybe the topics and things that we'd cover, it was really interesting because the school was so keen to ask us to come up with a topic. And we were equally as keen to learn about, well, what do students want to hear about? How do we make sure that this is right? So I think, when we think about skills, something else that's come up today is there's no ownership around skills. It's no one part of the sector's responsibility around skilling. It's a shared agenda. And we really want to make sure in a way there is no right or wrong. We're in this rapidly changing environment, new skills are emerging, new technologies are emerging. And really, all of us are just trying to do our best to predict and get it right and skill people in the right way. So yeah, I think definitely more that can be done, but I think there's already some really great examples out there.
Got it. One more question, then we'll go on to the questions in the chat box. And you mentioned then India, and of course your role is global. Your organisation's a global business. Is this a global topic? Do you think that the conversation that we've been having today is replicated in other parts of Europe, in the Americas, in Asia, or is it? I can guess the tactics might change country by country, but is there a regional lens added to this as well, or are all these things it's a global concern for organisations?
Yeah, the term I always tend to use is flexibility in a framework. There's almost a frame, and I would say within the wider landscape and framework, it absolutely is a conversation, but there tends to be nuance in each region around the focus. If I use India as the example, we've been really focused the last couple of years in all of our roles we've had in India have been technical. And so I think there's been a slightly different focus. Obviously, those core human skills absolutely still important and have a presence, but there's been a slightly different focus, I think, in terms of the conversations we've been having with schools and things. So yeah, it's absolutely a conversation that is happening globally. We're just seeing slight nuance with maybe how it's applied, and we've just gone through that adjustment, I guess, from 18 months ago. We were an early careers team. We've almost rebranded internally as emerging talent careers, and I know that's been a big topic of conversation. But even one of our big opportunities is apprenticeships, and really honing in on the apprenticeships route. That looks very different around the world. So I think another example of actually a big focus for us tends to be around scalability. How do we come up with solutions that are scalable? But I think there's just this natural that it may have to look different in different regions, as long as we can explain that and explain still what's the problem organizationally that we're facing, and how are these programs solving that problem, and then just being able to call out those regional nuances wherever we can.
We can do. Great, got it. Okay, I'm gonna go through some of the questions in the chat. I'll work backwards actually for the first one. I'll ask it to you first, Hayley, because you mentioned that you quite like the phrase human skills. Is there some common language you should have around it? So is there some common language you use? In our first report, we talked about behavioural, cognitive, and technical. What phraseology do you use, or do you think we might all move to? I think we consensus we all hate soft skills, don't we?
Yeah, and this is interesting because I don't know if there is a necessarily a right or wrong. I've definitely heard lots of different terms used. Um, when I think about it, I think about almost our I link it to our hiring process. We've almost got, okay, the more human core skills are those 8 skills we look for right at the start of the process. And then we move on to almost a next stage of the process to think about the more functional technical skills. So I think it's been logical for us to think about them in that way. It's almost breaking down those different elements as we think about assessing. But then I would say actually from the development side, they blend quite a bit. So we really think about mixing them. What are some of the foundational technical functional skills, but also how we blend in some of the core skills across all of our programs. So I think it's a hard one. I think, we just had a similar conversation internally about different kinds of assessments, and actually someone pulled a list of all the different definitions of skills-based assessments and then cognitive assessments, and we were trying to actually bring some clarity around that. And I think that's a similar one. It's really hard to get to a place of everyone using the same terms.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. Jim, I noticed in the chat, the keeping on that you thought that human skills had the most clarity. Do you think we'll ever get consensus or skills, or actually, I'll ask this of Ali as well, actually. I used to think that we should have standard typology would make it really easy for everybody. But then actually some of the thinking is that when you start to impose those kind of standard typologies, people rebel against it because you're not part of the co-creation phase. What's your thoughts on that broader terminology? And should we also differentiate between what are human skills and also there is still that need for technical skills in many roles?
Yeah, I think we're never going to reach a point where, okay, this is the Bible for the top 10 and everybody's agreed. We've all got different taxonomies, but I think the important thing is nobody's describing things that anybody else is saying, hang on, that's a bit odd. Why are you doing that? Why is that skill important? I mean, actually, I could maybe, I don't know if I'm able to share. I've got a slide which actually has been really helpful for us.
You should have the share button, Jim.
If I share, can you, oops.
Yep, got that.
Can you see, does it say level 3?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah. So that we found kind of quite helpful. That's the level 3 leadership and management apprenticeship. And actually it's described in business terminology. So again, I said that alignment between the world of HR and the world of business, I think is really important. So rather than describing it or, bluntly navel gazing as a bunch of professionals around the taxonomy, describe it in a language that the business is going to relate to, and could say, yep, that all makes complete sense. Right. If you can deliver a program that upskills people in those core capabilities, that makes complete sense to us as a business. And it feels to me that's a more valuable approach than spending any more time trying to coalesce around a specific taxonomy.
That's great.
Happy to share that. There's quite a lot of stuff behind that as well. So I'll share that with you, Stephen, and you can share with people on the call if that's helpful.
Yes, we can add it to the link when we send it through on the when we send the recording through. Similar question to you, Ali, on that terminology piece. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts around what the right phrasing is, and also one of the questions up front was about that engaging with academics, and I'm sure you've got some who just get it straight away and are bought into it, and some who might be a little more reluctant. And like I'd imagine they're the kind that would rebel to, oh, you're just giving me a standard typology, and are automatically going to argue against it, particularly in light of academic freedom. So just interested to know what your thoughts are on terminology and standardization.
Yeah, I think you can definitely over standardize, and I think we can get too hung up about all sort of using exactly the same language. But I think the point I was referring to earlier is how can you kind of close the gap in understanding? I mean, just a simple shift when we brought in future skills. I can't remember the last time I talked internally about employability. So the baggage that came with talking to academics about employability is we talk about skills, and actually they're like, skills, yeah, that's probably something to do with us. Whereas it's very easy to sort of bat employability straight back to the careers team. So yes, I think it matters, but not to the extent that we get so hung up on speaking exactly the same language all the time. I do like human skills and human-centric skills because I think in an AI age it's also like really relevant. But I think terminology also moves on, and we need to have the agility, don't we, to move with it. So
Definitely. Yeah. We've just got a few minutes left, so I'm going to kind of end on one question. It's funny enough, we've got our development survey coming out next week, and I've just been sort of working with Claire and our team on the press release and trying to avoid this language of, almost tabloidy, that employers aren't happy with graduates or students, and students don't have workplace skills, blah, blah. It's interesting that you mentioned Bobby Duffy, who we've got speaking next week, because I do like his work on delayed adulthood and society shifts, etc. So somebody did ask a question in the chat around, CEC put some work out based on their work in schools, which is that, of course, as they're doing more work with schools, so pupils should be getting more understanding of the workplace. Do you think there is something around actually the way society has shifted, people staying in education longer? Actually, we do need to help students more be work ready for the workplace, or do you think this is the way it's always been?
I think we can get. I think what we find in higher education is that every new cohort brings a slightly different challenge. I think that's been particularly true over the past 5 years, with everyone having been impacted by COVID at a different point in their development. It's still there. There's certainly a shift in the sort of 18, 19-year-olds that we see arriving now from 2 or 3 years ago. But I don't think we can make too many. At the moment, I don't think we can make too many sort of longer term assumptions. We do see this sort of persistent sort of fear of failure, which I think our education system creating continues to kind of reinforce the teaching to the test, the narrowing, the sort of storing in short-term memory and so on. And I think that unlearning is still a big part of what we need to do. Part of the reason we're doing that is to help them sort of thrive and succeed in higher education. But I think an increasingly bigger part of why we're doing that is allowing them both as they're transitioning into higher education to develop the habits that will help them to transition out the other end. 3 years is not a very long time. So that's for us is thinking we've kind of really rethought transition in the context of working back from where we want them to be when they leave us.
Got it. Thanks. Your thoughts on that, on actually the sort of the journey that young people go through education and the experiences they get and that transitions into work? Is it something that you think has changed over recent years?
Who's that to?
Sorry, I said to yourself, Jim. I'm going to go to you first,
sorry,
Jim, and then up on Hayley. If that's all right.
I think it has incrementally. I think it needs a wholesale change. I think I had what you could regard as sort of, a very traditional education through kind of school and university. But my personal reflection is you kind of learn everything in your education except what's really helpful in life, and by extension work. And actually that's kind of amusing if it trips off the tongue, but it's kind of a bit of a serious problem. And it feels to me that we should be. Everything I learned from that education to employment project with the government was that we need to be educating young people before secondary school. From the age of 7, 8 years old, people are discounting careers and routes and pathways based on what's put in front of them and stereotypes, and actually explaining and having employers explaining. I love what Hayley said, that they are taking their approach way earlier into employment, into education, to explain and have role models explaining, this is what I do for a living and these are the things that are important to us. That's really inspiring. And I think creating those porous boundaries between employers and educators, and I don't think we can do this through government is quite slow. Governments are meant to, in a pre-Trumpian world, make sure that the world is stable and exchange rates are stable and electricity turns on if we have cyber attacks, things like that. They are not able to be as agile as employers are. So actually, my hope is that employers and providers like ourselves can actually take agency and do whatever they can to take it back as early as they possibly can into a space that young people inhabit and say, this is what's important to us. These are the things that we really value. And that's what I think needs to happen.
Great, thanks, Jim. And then a final word to yourself, Hayley, on do you think it is an impact of COVID? Is it something you see in actually the people that you're hiring? Are you having to do more than maybe you did 5 years ago in terms of developing these skills?
Yeah, and it was really interesting. I think that was definitely my reflection from this part of the conversation is, if we think about these students have gone through, we've all gone through a global pandemic, but they've gone through it at at such a core moment in their lives and in their educational journeys. And it's really interesting when you would think about lived experiences. I don't know. I can't imagine what that was like. And obviously different individuals will have approached that differently as well. So I think I was having a conversation the other day actually with a colleague who was almost who was disagreeing somewhat with some of the generational differences that are called out stereotypically, and was almost saying, actually, are there generational differences, or actually are there just different things that different generations have to work through, and the environment around is changing so that different conversations maybe come up at different times. So it was a really interesting conversation, because I think the pandemic has been a big one, definitely. Something for us is we're seeing students really, really engaging with in-person experiences and really seeking that really experiential being together, that community element. And there might be an assumption that they may be very, very comfortable with self-paced learning, online, virtual learning, but actually, if that's how they've had to spend a lot of their time during their education, now they're really embracing it. They're in the workforce. They want to be here in the office. We get really, really great feedback on the environment they bring, the energy they bring to the office. I think people are really excited for our interns to join in a couple of weeks' time. So how do we embrace that? How do we bring in all that energy and we bring that to the general office environment as well?
Fantastic. Hayley, Jim, Ali, really thank you for taking the time out of your busy days. We had a really lots of conversation today, so we've gone into quite deep into this subject on skills, and it's something we're going to be doing an awful lot more work on over the coming months, and no doubt years probably. So, and thanks to everybody who joined the webinar. Thanks for popping your questions into the chat box. If you've got any questions you'd like to follow up with our presenters, please just get in touch. We will send a recording link on the webinar, or pop that slide in to the email as well. Jim, we'll be doing some more webinars on this subject throughout the year. We are putting in place a forum to discuss some of these ideas, not a kind of a talking to you type forum, but one very much where we just want you to get sharing ideas and conversations. If you haven't heard it yet, we did a podcast, myself and Tom from M&G talking about these broader issues. We've got another one we're about to record coming up, so please do keep looking for that emerging talent stuff, because we're going to be doing a lot more on it this year. Thanks very much. So whether you're watching this live or you're watching the recording a bit later, hope to see you all soon. Thanks very much. And a final thank you, Jim, Hayley, Ali, really great. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thanks so much, Steve. Really enjoyed that. Bye, everybody.